Ever wondered about what's involved in rubbing shoulders with some of the big names in music? If you get a chance to interview them, what do you ask? I mean, you think about the obvious stuff, and odds are they've been asked before. Maybe they've been asked hundreds of times before. So doing that really isn't going to give you something that stands out, is it, in terms of something meaningful in the interview that you're doing? Antonino Tati is a music journalist, the founder of Cream magazine. He's an author, and he's made a career out of mixing it with some of the world's most famous musicians. The best of these interviews are the basis of his book, which is called There's Your Quote, Mate. And he's here with you this afternoon. Hello, Antonio.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, thanks. Who have you gone for? Let's drop a couple of names. We probably should get that out of the way because I've got a feeling that's going to set the tone for where we're headed.
Yeah, well, you want me just to name drop? Goodness. From, I suppose, Nick Cave and Kylie Minogue, icons like Patti Smith and Meatloaf, Henry Rollins, Dave Grohl, all the way through to your modern artists, I suppose, like Paloma Faith and Calvin Harris, Ellie Goulding. I don't know. I'll need to breathe before I go through the next part of the list, if you don't mind, Patrick.
That's okay. That's all allowed. What do you think, then, is the way to talk to these people so that you get something useful to show for it?
I think what I basically do is just try to build a rapport with them from the beginning. I mean, first I give them, the old suck job and say how much I love the new record. But then I'll want to grab, or get hold of some really interesting quotes outside of the music realm, things on sex, drugs, race, religion, just outside of rock and roll. And so to do that, you kind of just talk about the easier stuff first, but then just before your 3-4 minutes left of the interview is almost up, you then go in hard with the, I suppose the more delicate subjects.
I'm sure it doesn't always go according to plan, though.
It certainly doesn't. I mean, you mentioned Kylie Minogue there, and for example, we were getting along like a house on fire. We had both just received, a bit bizarre, but I was wearing this T-shirt from a lipstick brand, and she had just received the same T-shirt that morning. So we were like old schoolgirls chatting to each other and almost filing each other's nails. But by the end of the interview, because I'd asked her about, a quote that Michael Hutchence had said, which is that he was less stoned, more stoned. Kylie's arguing he was less stoned and less inebriated when he was with her. I'm getting them mixed up. But believe me, in the book it's kosher and it's all correct. But basically, she just got uppity. Also, when I brought up the fact that Jason Donovan had sued a publication because they had run with an image of him that was photoshopped of Jason wearing a T-shirt saying queer as F... ... I won't say it on ABC radio, but he sued them. They almost, they did ultimately go out of business, the Face magazine. So I questioned, what Jason thought about what Kylie thought of Jason's alleged homosexuality at the time. And she basically was giving me a response, but in that roundabout way, and in her response, there's still this ambiguity there. So there's a lot of, I suppose, innuendo throughout the book about, sexuality and gender issues in particular, and a whole lot of other stuff, from politics to war, money to, the faux pas of fame.
Yeah. What have you learnt in all the years that you've been talking to these people?
I've learnt I've got a big mouth. And that I sort of bite the bullet and tend not to bite my tongue enough. So I've sort of gotten into trouble, as you know, a few times. The first time was with Nick Cave. Well, the first interview in the book is with Nick Cave, and basically he got really peeved off because I kept asking questions that were just too deep. Thought because I was writing for a pop lifestyle publication, I should be keeping the questions, nice and breezy. But instead I was asking him, whether he felt quite responsible to have music with a message, that his fans look up to him like a god, and, can he shine the light on them as opposed to just singing about depressing things? And he just went off on this, diatribe about, my music is light-infused and da-da-da-da-da. And then I said to him, bringing back Kylie, Patrick, into the conversation.
All roads lead to Kylie at this stage, yes.
Minogue back in the 80s, before you guys, did that duet, Where the Wild Roses Grow. And he said, well, I reckon Kylie Minogue's got more talent in her little pink fingernail than, all of the Aussie indie bands put together. And all the Aussie effing indie bands put together. He goes, there's your quote, mate. And I just thought, well, that's quite bizarre because all those indie bands look up to this guy. So I sort of got something out of him that I don't think other mags would have tried to get. They would have all just revered him and gone with the headline of, Fabulous Nick Cave and his dark, dark interview, whereas I sort of went one step further and got the dark, angry side of Nick Cave where he virtually, wanted to almost kick me out of the hotel suite. And then there was Meatloaf, who basically got uppity because I thought his lyrics were irresponsible in the sense that there were blood themes throughout a lot of his songs.
Yes, there are.
And,
yes.
It was in the time of, the HIV/AIDS crisis peak, and so I said, do you feel irresponsible singing about, taking blood from a woman's neck when we've got HIV/AIDS to contend with? And the guy was climbing over the table and wanted to kill me, Patrick, because it was just a question you don't ask a pop star, apparently.
Seems like it. But I'm wondering how comfortable it is to ask those questions. I mean, you're there to do a job. You're presumably expected to come back with the goods as well. And you've also got to think about what the people who are going to read this article you will write would be asking themselves. You've got to channel all of those things into it. And in a way, you've got to play that character, don't you?
Absolutely. And I sort of find with today's celebrities, they're very tight-lipped. They're worried about wanting to appeal to such broad markets in this competitive, age that they tend to be generic with their responses. I mean, Kim Kardashian, Kanye West, Keisha,
they're all the ones that spring to mind, aren't they?
Yeah, they just sort of, there's nothing to say about, except for maybe their favourite colour of lipstick or eyeshadow. And I kind of think, no, there's so much more that you people need to express opinions about, whether it's, the disruptive state of war or the conniving manner of leaders in the free world, etc. They do need to show their fans that they've got their blinkers on and they're actually thinking about what's going down in this world around us. I mean,
does it matter though what they think? If they're a pop singer, why does their opinion count for anything?
Because they're models as well. They're pop stars, and they want us to look up to them. So I figure, well, hang on, we can't just look up to you for your latest wardrobe, or shenanigans within your household. In that case of the Kardashians, you're inspiring people here, and the next generation needs a whole lot more to be inspired by than trivial and superficial things. So we don't have to expect them to express their political stance, but we can when something big blows up, like the Harvey Weinstein story or Trump in general, I expect them to have something a lot more substantial to say, and not just something, cryptic on Twitter either. It should be, and journalists have the responsibility too. Even pop journalists have the responsibility to ask questions to these pop stars and rock and roll idols about things a lot deeper than the last guitar riff on the record.
Maybe that's the problem then. Maybe they're not being asked the right questions in the first place by most journalists, not people like you, of course.
No, or you. I'm sure you've asked quite a few, hard-hitting questions there, Patrick. I must say, ultimately, the book is one about frankness and honesty, and it also gives myself a slap on the wrist at the end where I actually am talking to an artist, a very contemporary artist called Charlie XCX.
Yes.
And she's whole, Generation Y, whatnot. And I've decided to play a word association game with her where I just brought up a headline or a famous name, and she would come back with a one-word answer, the whole psychological trick. And so I brought up Donald Trump, and she came back with idiot. And then I said Melania Trump, and she said poor girl. And then I said the recent English election outcome, and she said, well, not what I would have expected or wanted. And then I said a word I really shouldn't have said. I said local terrorism. And she shut down. And she said, look, I don't want to play this game anymore. I don't want to be responding to deep subjects with one-word answers. And that was probably irresponsible on my behalf to bring up to someone like Charlie XCX because, number one, she's a young chicken. Number two, she had just come off a plane and was very generous to give me 10 minutes of her time. Three, she was about to go on stage, mate, in Bali to perform live. Mm-hmm. And this was all 1 month after the whole Ariana Grande tragedy of outside Ariana Grande's concert. So I was fairly irresponsible to ask her. I wasn't very sensitive, but because it was a chaotic situation, it was a rushed interview, etc., I just went out there, played the word game, and those two horrible words, local terrorism, came up, and she shut me down, basically. So after 20 years of this anthology, this book, thick as, of me asking every question under the sun, me getting a whole bunch of rock and roll stars and pop princesses angry, you get this one little, Gen Y saying to me, mate, you got to shut your mouth sometimes.
Yep.
So she shuts me down by the end of the book, basically.
It's probably not a bad note to leave it on, really, in a lot of ways. Antonino Tati is who you're hearing from today, a music journalist and author. Now, you started Cream magazine as, you came through the street press, you came through that sort of background. We know that that's a very tough road to hoe, even at the best of times, and things have got a lot harder in recent years. Does that change the game for you?
Certainly. I mean, in my day, I was living hand to mouth. When I was writing for street press, I was getting a paltry $300 a week salary, which even back in the 90s is just so low. So I would rely on going to the PR events, and my dinner and my beverage that night was what PR companies gave me. And they had a budget back then because it wasn't so competitive and because records and CDs were selling. So
yes.
They made a lot of money and they were putting on the big parties. You'd also get to meet the celebrities after their show and their promotional performance. But you'd walk home with this goodie bag of stuff and you'd with a full stomach, and that was dinner for me. And then I'd go to an art gallery as well just to get fine champagne into the system as well.
It's all about having variety in your diet. I guess does the modern economics of it though, just the way that business, as you say, things have tightened up. There might have been a bit of fat in the budgets back in those days. I think within media companies as well, it's the same sort of outlook. Does that change the job with the expectations that are placed on your shoulders?
Certainly, because I've always kind of either worked for myself or worked freelance. But with the full-time employees whose hours are getting cut back, it changes it dramatically, but then that should be more motivation to make their worth highlighted even more so for their bosses to make them keep their job. They need to be, asking more probing questions, getting readers more excited about what they're reading on the net or on paper, and not play the old school anymore. They're that sort of old guard of, ironically though, I must say this, Patrick, there are journos back in the 60s that would have got really good quotes because everyone would have been off their nut back in the 60s. But these days, things are so safe, we need to shake it up. And if we want the paychecks as journalists, we need to make the stories exciting, I think.
I think that's a very, very good lesson to be teaching to anyone who's coming up through the ranks these days. So hopefully you are passing on a few of those skills. Antonio, good luck, and I hope we get a chance to talk again. It's been great. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Patrick. Oh, did we give the book title? I don't think we did.
I did at the start, and I'll give it again. Don't you worry.
Thank you, buddy.
Don't miss the plug. Antonino Tati, who's, he's the one who came up with numerous interviews throughout his career, but he mentioned there a little while ago, the quote from Nick Cave is actually the one that is the title of the book. It's called, There's Your Quote, Mate. It's 4:21 now.